Good afternoon. This is Kathleen Krevetski on my second episode of On the Porch. And it's November, it's warm, the sun's shining, and we are on the porch today with Jack Crowther. And the reason that he's here today is he's going to talk about his latest adventure in Rutland that has been going on quite a while. Welcome, Jack. Thanks for being here.
Glad to be here, Kathleen, and talk to you. And it was you who really got me started on this whole fluoride situation. So I'm glad to be back with you and to talk about it.
Was that a good thing or a bad thing, Jack? Well, it started with the chloramine. If you remember, when we were trying to keep chloramine out of the water here in Rutland City, fluoride kept coming right up saying this is the problem, and none of us wanted to deal with it. And the reality is, when you look at what's going on with the science and what has happened with the politics over years, we need to change. We need to change. So you went to the board of aldermen this past week, and can you talk about that?
Sure. My purpose was to request that the board take a fresh look at fluoridation of the public water system. It's a new board, or several new members since the last time I approached them. Over the years, I've been before the board a number of times to talk about the developing science of fluoride toxicity, but I hadn't been before this board that was seated in March. And the science, particularly as it relates to fluoride neurotoxicity, that's its ability to affect the brain, particularly the brains of infants in the womb and infants who are being bottle fed with formula. The science pertaining to that has been developing steadily over the years, particularly since 2017. So I wanted to approach the board and ask them, let's take a fresh look at that, with the idea of deciding whether Rutland should continue with fluoridation. And for 6 years now, my position has been that fluoridation is a misguided policy and should be stopped, but the board has not so far agreed with that, so I'm pursuing the issue as I have for a number of years.
When it came to a vote in 2016, the neurotoxicity was there. And when the public health department of Vermont came to town and reported that fluoride did not cross the placenta, I feel like they won that vote on misinformation, and it hasn't been righted, is what it comes down to. So what did you ask the Board of Aldermen?
Well, the way I viewed it was that they would refer it to Public Works Committee for further consideration, which they have now done, and I expect to hear from Paul Clifford, the chair of the City Public Works Committee, to see about how we go forward with this. I hope that what will result will be some kind of a fact-finding effort where people on both sides of the issue come in and present their evidence. And one of the things I requested was that testimony be allowed from remote locations. Because of my work with the Fluoride Action Network, which is a national and international organization, I have contacts with people in the scientific community, dentistry, medicine, public issue activism that I can call on, and I've been told that my effort to explore the subject in Rutland will get support from FAN. It of course depends on different people's schedules and the board's schedule, but I'm looking forward to presenting our case, both myself and with people with specific expertise.
Now, we know there's lots of interested people here in Rutland City, and we know that because we were able to vote down adding chloramine and asking them to do better maintenance of the water plant, and that has actually taken care of the chloramine. We have not had byproducts since then, since they started taking better care of the sand filtration system. So people supported us there, and even in the election, even in the vote in 2016, there's lots of people. We can't do this by ourselves anymore. We have to have people paying attention, and neurotoxicity is all about science. So I would like to adjourn here and show you what Jack has been working on as far as the science goes. So we'll go inside and we'll resume this little gathering.
Sure.
Sounds good? And so we're here in Jack's home, and when we talked about the science of fluoridation, there's a long history, and we all know about science today because we're listening to what's going on in the TV on who believes in science and who doesn't. So Jack, could you talk about the beginnings of how fluoride came? Was it based on scientific fact, or what would you call it?
Well, the inquiries that led to the discovery of the effect of fluoride on teeth and fluoridation traces back to about 1901, when a dentist, Frederick McKay, established a dental practice in Colorado, and he noticed something that was known as Colorado brown stain on the teeth, and it was very prevalent in certain areas, and he was mystified by this, but it was ultimately traced to the water supply of the people who had this effect. And then around early 1930s, it was found through the efforts of an Aluminum Company of America chemist that fluoride was the cause of these brown stains. Fluoride is now known to interfere with the formation of tooth enamel. Well, so there were various studies that were carried out, and ultimately the suggestion was made that because the people with these brown stained teeth seem to have fewer cavities, the suggestion came from industry, basically, that, well, maybe fluoride could be used to prevent tooth decay.
Because they were cavity free.
Well, the teeth seemed to be resistant to cavities,
Right.
even though the structure of the teeth for a long time has been recognized as weaker when this condition exists. So in any case, there was some research conducted. It has since been scrutinized and criticized, but in any event, in 1945, there began two tests of fluoridation, that is, putting fluoride in the water supply. This was in Newburgh, New York, and Grand Rapids, Michigan. So that started in 1945. By 1950, even though the tests in these two cities, which were supposed to run 10 or 15 years, even though those studies had not been completed, the U.S. Public Health Service went ahead and endorsed fluoridation for any community that was willing and able to implement it. So since 1950, the U.S. government and a number of other organizations, including the American Dental Association, have endorsed the practice of fluoridation, even though the origin of this rested on a very small scientific base, which has been well challenged since then. But the government and medical groups have continued to steadfastly defend it. What needs to be recognized is that industry played a large role in getting this program established, and I can go into that if you'd like, but I'll pause and let you ask another question.
Well, let's talk about the fluorosis back then, that they knew that it was damaging the teeth, but what they decided to say was that it was actually a sign of beauty to have fluorosis. And people bought it, that if you had white streaks, and you can look in your mouth and see if you drank too much fluoride as a kid, because you will have white streaks. And indeed, 40% of the population now, is it 40% of the young population, or is it everybody?
Adolescence, I think, is the descriptor.
Right. So it wasn't based on science. It was based on studies that they gave up early because they just thought it was a good thing to put fluoride in your water, because they didn't want it coming out of the smokestacks. And you talk about where they get the fluoride to put in our water.
So the major source of fluoride for public water systems is the phosphate fertilizer industry. When you produce phosphate fertilizer by treating ore with sulfuric acid, one of the byproducts is called fluorosilicic acid. This is a liquid that's scrubbed out of the smokestacks of these factories that make phosphate fertilizer.
Because it's not allowed to go into the atmosphere.
It's not allowed to go into the atmosphere, and this liquid called fluorosilicic acid, it's highly corrosive. It's really hazardous waste. You cannot simply dump it in a river or the ocean or a pond or anything like that. But the irony is that it's allowed to be shipped to municipalities around the country and put into the water system. Somebody made the remark that the solution to pollution is dilution. In other words, you avoid dumping it into a river by putting it gradually into a public water system. So, and most of that is going to wind up in the rivers anyway, because of flushing of toilets and
which is affecting our wildlife, which fluoride does affect our wildlife. There's been data on that. So it's a big job to turn this around here in Rutland City, but I think you're well on your way. We have a small population, and we thrive on being healthy here in Rutland. And I think that it's an economic push that you can actually, if people find out that you've taken the fluoride out of the water for Rutland, they're going to look at Rutland and say, they use science. They use science for their decisions and not what somebody says because it's been going on for 70 years. So you've got a big job ahead of you. We all do. We all do, absolutely.
Well, I was pleased that at Monday's Board of Aldermen meeting, people from outside the city talked about coming into Rutland and going to restaurants and taking part in the farmers market and so on, so that even outsiders are concerned about the quality of Rutland's water. in my efforts over the years, I have approached an ice maker in the city, a beer maker in the city, restaurants in the city. None of them wanted to get into this issue of fluoridation in the water supply, but I tried to make the case that, okay, if you're making beer in Rutland, fluoride is going into your beer, and this is not helping the purity of the product. We're trying to develop Rutland as a sort of a part of an agricultural engine, as Greg Cox calls it. In other words, a food hub, a center for
That's right.
a revived local agriculture, and part of that whole idea is the purity of food, and of course the plants that are being grown in our demonstration greenhouse at the Vermont Farmers Food Center. They need to be watered, and they're being watered with fluoridated water, which is not, really desirable. So I was pleased at Monday's meeting that people from both within and outside the city weighed in on their views.
Absolutely, absolutely. We pride ourselves on clean water here, and we have very good water. We just don't need to pay extra to put a contaminant in it that we definitely know is neurotoxic to our children. The documentation, the science is there that it is affecting our children's brains, but that's not the only issue. There are other medical issues. Do you want to talk about that?
Sure. I think maybe I should first focus on this developmental neurotoxicity a bit, because that's probably the strongest talking point of the anti-fluoridation movement right now. And I gave each of the aldermen and the mayor a copy of a fact sheet about the neurotoxicity of fluoride, and recent high-level research, some of it funded by the U.S. government, has pointed to the vulnerability of the fetus and the infant, specifically when the mother, a pregnant mother, is consuming water in a fluoridated community. She is taking in a level of fluoride that can affect the baby's IQ, according to these recent high-quality studies. The other point of vulnerability is after the baby is born, if they're being bottle-fed with formula, and the formula is made with fluoridated water, then this very small human being is taking in, relatively speaking, a huge amount of fluoride compared to its body weight. So it's much different than an adult taking a glass of fluoridated water. So, and I said to the alderman that Rutland is not warning, is not putting out any kind of a warning that these two situations should be avoided, that a pregnant woman should not be drinking fluoridated water, or that a bottle-fed baby should not have their formula made with fluoridated water because of this particular vulnerability.
There is no dose management. If you're a young kid running for your high school or your middle school and you're thirsty, you're going to drink unlimited amounts of it until you take care of your thirst. So yes, it's just not being taken into consideration. The dosage for who you are and how much you drink is what it comes down to. Well, as you can imagine, this is just the beginning, and we're not alone. There has been a court case going through the California courts, which are federal courts, and you want to talk about that as far as the courts are going to decide on what to do next.
Sure. So in 2016, the Fluoride Action Network, the Food and Water Watch, Mothers Against Fluoridation, and several other individuals and organizations filed a petition in federal court under the Toxic Substances Control Act, sometimes called TSCA, filed a petition with the EPA to prevent fluoride from being added to water supplies because of its toxicity. That petition was denied by the EPA, and then under provisions of the law, the plaintiffs, that is FAN and these individuals and other groups, filed suit in federal court to accomplish the same thing. And so that was, that followed shortly after the denial of the petition. There have been a number of delays, as often happens. The government shut down at one point, and that pushed the calendar back. So the case went to trial in June of 2020. And we opponents of fluoridation felt very good about how the trial went. We got our evidence from top scientists out there, and so the trial basically ended. Since then, there have been various motions and delays. Our understanding is that the judge in the case, Edward Chen, is waiting for a couple of pieces of evidence that are important. One is a report from the National Toxicology Program on fluoride toxicity, and we feel that is basically supporting our contention, but the final version of that report has yet to be delivered. And then in addition, there's a study out of Spain dealing with neurotoxic effects on IQ, and the judge was interested in getting those results as well. So the next hearing is scheduled for January of 2022, and we're hoping to see this thing wrapped up soon in the coming year, but it's given the delays thus far, it's a little hard.
So it may be outlawed in the future, but waiting when it's a neurotoxic on our kids is just not good ethics, really. Well, there's a lot more that we can talk about, but I think the bottom line is, what can people do now? And that is make sure your kids are brushing their teeth with fluoridated toothpaste. We're not against direct application. The science shows that fluoride directly on your teeth works. The science shows fluoride ingested does not work. It causes more problems than not having it. What else, Jack? What else can we do as far as consumers and residents of Rutland City?
Well, I would love it if Public Works Department at least put out a warning to pregnant women and parents of young children that keep fluoride away from these people. Buy bottled unfluoridated water, mixed formula. Well, of course, breastfeeding is preferred, but mixing formula with unfluoridated water is another protective measure.
That should be publicized.
Yeah. Right over there is a reverse osmosis water filter, which I've used for several years, and that unit costs about $400, but my wife and I and any visitors are able to to drink unfluoridated water, make our coffee, steam our vegetables with unfluoridated water.
Important.
Because we have that. You kind of touched on an area that carries the label precautionary principle. In other words, until the science is finalized, which may be years down the road, it will never really be finalized. But in the meantime, shouldn't we halt the fluoridation of water? And I would love to see that the city of Rutland just pause while they're investigating this in light of the risks that have been clearly demonstrated. So, a warning, a pause, but in any case, it looks like we're going to have an examination of the fluoridation issue, which I'm happy that it's going to happen.
Thank you. And thank you for all your work you've done over the years. That has been really helpful to me, especially because trying to do this alone sometimes is difficult. But we know when we lost that vote, when the pro-fluoride people put out misinformation, we still had a vote of 2/3. What was the vote? So
Well,
that
the margin was 3-2.
Right.
So it was 2,600 in favor of continuing fluoridation, 1,600 against. And so we often hear, well, the people have decided, but the thing that's missing from that statement is that I don't have the right to fluoridate my neighbor's water, to virtually force my neighbor to take a drug in the water system under standard and long-standing medical ethics. Informed consent says that the patient has a right to decide whether or not to take a drug or not to take it. And a dentist who was advising his patient to take fluoride pills, for example, if the patient said, no, I don't want to do that, the dentist would have no alternative but to accept that. And yet somehow we're comfortable with putting this chemical, this drug, into the water supply, where you have to take, you have to spend money and go to the trouble of getting an alternate water supply if you don't want that. So the ethical issue has just been kind of swept aside in this matter.
So we'll be bringing it to your attention. Please share this with your friends, let your friends know, talk to our elected leaders, and hopefully the discussion will be wide open this time. Thank you today for
Glad to be
Jack
with you,
Crowther
Kathleen.
and Kathleen Krevetski on the porch inside where it's cold. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.